So yeah, I think Rocket is either going to like collapse under its own weight and implode, or it's going to go into orbit. But either way, good news is for everybody listening, we launched Rocket today. So it's available to Datastar Pro users in the Pro repo. You can go, it's in alpha, early alpha, let's say. So I want to say it's feature complete, but we're putting it out there for people to start using to just uh, see what the reception is like. And we have docs for it. We have several examples, actually quite a few examples that you created, really quite impressive ones. So I think everybody should go, even if you're not planning on using Rocket, just see what it's all about. And I think we should discuss what it is all about. You're wearing your Rocket hat. I'm wearing my Rocket shirt. So
Nice.
we're all we're dressed for the occasion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's been kind of a weird journey because I've had examples of this for quite a while now. Like I've been baking on it for many iterations. I think I'm on version 7 at this point internally to myself, where I basically started over many times. And it was because I didn't know. The thing is that we keep saying to people, hey, like if you have client-side state, you should encapsulate it and it should be in a web component. But I think very few people actually have that problem. So it was weird to try to figure out what I thought the best ideals for a web component convenience library would be. So right. I'm really happy with where it's at. There's still maybe some things in the syntax that we can talk to people about and see where it's at. But the overall idea, I think, is really, really solid in what it provides. And the gist of it is all I'm trying to do is make it so that making declarative components is just a first class citizen. Whereas when you normally make web components, you have to do this class thing and inheritance, and you have to. It doesn't feel like any of the other stuff. So if you already know how to use Datastar, you can start making web components day one. You get scope signals, life cycles. You get these import things, all these things that I'm sure Ben will bring up. But like, it's about making web components very easy to create and also to control while still using bog standard like HTML. Like you're not learning anything new.
Right. So I thought we'd back up and talk about web components because this is important regardless of whether people are using Rocket or not. What is a web component? And more importantly, why would you even want to use a web component? Outside of the obvious, which is like you're using some UI library and it provides web components and you just kind of pull them into your project. But why would you want to use them with Datastar? And for me, it really clicked when I started using Datastar, right? So web components. So let's back up. Okay. So you have some functionality that you want in your website or your web app, and that requires some JavaScript. To pick a random example, a date picker or something like that. So there are lots of date picker JavaScript libraries out there. You can grab one and you can just put it on your page. And normally what you do is you have a div or some element and you give it an ID. And then you write some JavaScript that says document dot get element by ID. You fetch the element and then you say like dot date picker or something like that. So you imperatively have to go grab the element and then tell the JavaScript library, here's the element in my DOM. I want you to turn this into whatever, this library does. And we've been using, libraries for over a decade. Like this is a very common, or decades. This is a very common way of doing things. The problem with that is that you end up, let's say you have 3 date pickers on your page. Now you've got to target each one individually and hook it up, or you put a class on each of them, the same class, and then you target the class, and then you loop over every element with that class and do the same thing. But each time you want to like pass in some options or configure it, you're doing this in JavaScript code. What a web component gives you, besides being a web standard, it also gives you the ability to create custom elements in HTML. So a web component will give you the ability to define, for example, date dash picker. It always has to have a dash or a hyphen in the name. That's distinguish it, I guess, from regular HTML element. Yeah, elements. But you just put that in your page, So you'll have like an open, if we go with the date picker example, opening HTML tag date picker, closing HTML tag date picker, and boom, you get your date picker like embedded in place. So you don't need to hook things up. And then when you go to provide options and configure it, you do it using HTML attributes. So you'll say, you'll have a HTML attribute, let's say options, or I don't know, background, or starting day of the week, or whatever it is, like however the component decides. But now you're doing it declaratively, right? You're using this custom HTML element as if it's a regular HTML element, even though you've created it using this JavaScript class. And there is a syntax and a format for creating web components. What you get is encapsulation, and you get reusability. So now you can use 3-4 date pickers on the same page, each with their own options defined declaratively. And there's no writing JavaScript to configure them, right? You write your JavaScript, that's how you write your web component. So you get those two benefits: encapsulation, because what exists within the web components is encapsulated within it, and you get reusability. The encapsulation even goes a step further, because you can have you can use light DOM or shadow DOM web components. Light DOM is essentially like what already exists on the page applies to your web component too. So any styles can just kind of flow into your web component, and JavaScript from outside your web component can access JavaScript, like everything inside the web component. And then you have the shadow DOM, which is there's a kind of a thicker layer of encapsulation where CSS and styling doesn't flow in. And then there's another mode. What is it? Open, close. I forget what that.
Yeah, within Shadow, there's open and closed for the shadow root, which
shadow root.
I mean, we're getting into the minutia, but yeah, there's different levels of encapsulation you can do depending on what makes sense to you. And there's also ways to kind of break through that. For example, if you use CSS variables, you can actually get direct access to styling. There's a bunch of ways that, like, there's a lot to go on here, but the nice thing is it's actually built into the browsers and you can actually read the specs. So it's not some magical thing. And also you get the fact that it's implemented at the C++ level means that it's going to be a lot faster, because it's doing things like property checking and attribute changes and all these things that would normally be, you'd have to do in the JavaScript level, you're doing directly in the browser, which is a pretty big deal.
So where it gets really interesting, or where it gets interesting, especially when you're using Datastar, is that now you can use Datastar attributes to drive properties or attributes on the web component itself. So you can use signals or whatever you're using for reactivity to drive your web component. Because, as you mentioned, the web component offers a way of listening for attribute changes that's built into web components. So web components, and also they can take value, right? Normally it's only form elements that have a value attribute. Well, web components can have a value attribute too, which means that you can use data bind.
Yeah, the idea is that you can do props down and events up. And the thing is, no matter what the internal state, like for example, when you're dealing with a password input field, the way that gets rendered, there's a lot more state going on than you realize as an individual user to how that password or that input field, there's a lot more going on. But you don't care, because you just get these values and changed events and stuff like that going on when you're dealing with a bog standard HTML element. What it allows you to do is have that same kind of interaction from any backend. And the reason why it's so valuable, at least for us in Datastar, is because we're backend agnostic. So you can have the same kind of mental model, no matter if you're Python or Go or Ruby or C. It does not matter. You're actually learning the syntax of that web component, as opposed to trying to figure out what's going on in that backend thing itself. So there's a weird line for Rocket, at least in my opinion, in that a lot of times people overwrite how many components they need, or try to do web components when they don't need it. But there's something really valuable in the idea that if you make a good solid set of, like, for example, UI components, which we'll probably get into, then everyone in every language has access to these things, and they learn one tool, and now they can make websites in forever, no matter what language they're in the backend. And I think that's really powerful. And no one's really doing that to the degree that I think they should be.
Right. So then we get to Rocket and what Rocket does for web components. Web components have a class-based syntax, so you generally write your web component in an external file. You pull it in. It doesn't have signals. It doesn't have that kind of reactivity. So there are libraries like lit, which make it easier to work with web components. They're good, but they generally are a little bit bloated depending on how much of there's several the pieces to that library, so they can get a bit bloated, but they make it simpler to work with web components.
Right.
It's great that it's a web standard, but it doesn't give you too much in terms of ergonomics. It's kind of a little bit clunky, the syntax, and you end up, writing a lot of JavaScript code in the end. And that's kind of what we're trying to avoid here. So the journey that you went on with Rocket was, well, how do we kind of create a declarative syntax for defining web components? And how do we make it so that you can just write it as part of your HTML using HTML tags and using some special data attributes? And then what Rocket does is it takes that, it first of all identifies what we're calling a Rocket component, and it essentially compiles that into a web component that is then just run, and then you can just embed your web components and use them on your page as you would with any web.
Yeah, absolutely. So the thing that was interesting to me is most things that are in this space involve a build step, right? So you have to build lit, you have to build these things. Even Vue, you can technically do as a web component at runtime, but it's not really built for that. So what I was trying to go for is, hey, what if just regular templates, which are built into the HTML spec, what if you can basically add data dash rocket and then give it a name and give it props and give these things and just use the browser's actually already built in template stuff as the templating language for how you build these things and keep it declarative. So there's some stuff that we do where we kind of read the template and then we take every place that you use things and then we reorganize it so that we're using scope signals, which I'm sure Ben will get into. There's things that we're doing, but I feel like it's really powerful in that we have this to give people a heads up, it's around 5 or 6 kilobytes, but it has an entire validation framework. It has an entire transforming framework. It does all the template stuff. And it means that you pay that one-time 5K cost or 6K cost. And then it doesn't matter how many templates or how many components you put on your page. You just have a bunch of templates that you can cache off. You can do a separate fetch call. You can do all these things, and it's just regular HTML. So it compresses really well. You can do it over SSE. You can do all these really interesting ideas, and you could actually make completely dynamic components in a way that I've never seen before. So you could actually build components on the fly. So yeah, people kind of think that I'm just a TypeScript guy, which first of all, I don't like TypeScript or JavaScript, but I just try to find the right tool for the job. And if you can find something that's dynamic and it's fast enough, then you should use it. Simple as that.
And to clarify, when you say templates, you mean the template HTML tag?
Yeah, the actual element template. Yeah. So sorry, template.
So we have an example on the website of. Oh, I forget what it is. I'm sorry. I should have.
Well, yeah, no. So there's a couple examples, all of the we don't have a lot of web components on the actual Datastar website because we haven't needed them. But for example, the copy button that you see part of every code highlight, that's a web component, and now it's a web component with no scripting at all. It's a pure template, which is really interesting. That it has literally it's all declarative in a way that the other one wasn't. Even though it's really short, it's 5 lines of Rocket to actually build. Also, the star field on the front page is now a Rocket web component. And in fact, one of the examples that we do is we actually break down exactly what the Rocket component uses. We do the actual entire Rocket component or the star field as a Rocket component as one of the examples. So you get access to this code. And even though Pro, it has the license thing attached to it, the thing is, all the components that I'm making here forward for Rocket are going to be open source for people. So if you don't use Rocket and you find a different way to do this, good luck to you. That part's going to be open source, but the actual runtime isn't. Just like in a video game, if you make a Pico 8, if you've ever made a game with that kind of thing, you pay for it once, and then every game out there is basically open source. So that's kind of the model, and hopefully it works for people.
Yeah, the example I was referring to, I just found it is on the reference page, and it's not so much an example. It's just like a comparison of a
Oh, yeah,
Rocket
yeah.
component versus the vanilla web component. So it's a basic, simple counter that you can just increment and decrement, and the Rocket version in HTML, like inlined in HTML, is 15 lines of code. So 15 lines of HTML code. And the JavaScript, so the vanilla kind of JavaScript version, is 108 lines of JavaScript code. And then, of course, you need to, a line of HTML to actually use it.
Yeah. So the one thing that's really valuable in this space, people are like, well, what happens in that 5 kilobytes? Like, what's actually, is that like the thing that takes the template and then generates the classes and actually registers them and all that? Yes, that's part of that 5 kilobytes, because that's kind of what lit does as well. But there's two things that I thought were really important that it comes to web components. Is I didn't want to try to redefine how to make web components or libraries. And what I mean by that is when you do the lit stuff, you have to have a build step. And if you include a library, that library has to be included as a build step. Two things that I thought were really important is that I wanted to make it so that you could import existing libraries like 3JS or eCharts or like QR code builders or any of these kinds of things. Like, I don't want to boil the ocean with Rocket. I want to make it so that it makes it very easy so that when you import it, you're guaranteed that it's there before you actually write scripts and all that. Like, do all the stuff that you would need to do to make a web component. I wanted that to be built in, but also I wanted the ability to do validation and transformations and stuff that you always do when you do things in lit or view or anything like this. You end up writing a ton of code that says, hey, I want this to be uppercase, or it needs to be between this min and max. And you basically have to always include Zod or JSON schema validation or something. And I found that like everyone does this all the time, and it actually bloats everyone's component. Whereas if we just build it into that 6 kilobytes that you pay, now everyone's on the same page, and it makes all the rest of the components actually a lot smaller. So the thing is to make things declarative. So we added a ton of options and features, and you should look at the reference to see how much it built into Rocket. But yeah, the fact that all that exists in 6 kilobytes and it's a one-time cost, I think is a big win, honestly.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible actually when you see it. You define your prop and you just can give it a min value, for example, or a max value, and you don't have to worry about doing the validation that is built in. Validation and transformations is built into Rocket. It's kind of one of those things that you could just kind of gloss over until you realize how useful this is. Like, if I actually had to do this myself, how much code it would be. The other thing, big thing, or very important thing, I think, is that, which you mentioned, is the ability to import a JavaScript library and essentially wrap it. So that date picker, that fictional date picker I was talking about earlier, let's say you wanted to use that specific one, but it's not available as a web component. Well, now you can import it using Rocket, and now it becomes part of your Rocket component, and you can just start using that library, that date picker, as a web component in your code. So that's like also a huge selling point, I think. In fact, most of the examples are like wrapping other libraries to do stuff. Or maybe
that's kind of the point, is that there's already a huge corpus of tools. Like if you have there's times where you can make a Rocket component and it's small and it just works, and you're like, great, that's great. Or I have something that's inline, like the star field. That's a completely inline component that's going out to no or else. I actually tried writing my own QR code library, like built into a Rocket component. And man, it was so hard to get error checking right and all these other things. And then I basically made it so I could just import QR creator, and it was done in 15 minutes.
If I remember correctly, yeah, that's what kind of, that was the impetus for you to say, okay, I just need to build an import, and then I don't have to write all this functionality myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Ironically, that QR code writer was actually for your talk that you gave, that people can actually finally get access to. Yes. Maybe you should say something about that real quick.
Okay, we can go off topic. So we've discussed the conference talk that I gave at the Craft CMS conference in Portugal, and that's now available to watch online. So I'll link it down below. And even though it's like the topic is Craft CMS, I go quite heavy into like the Datastar concepts and what you can do with it. And I do some like live demos, live participation. And since then it's spun off into Blinksy, and now I'm working on another demo actually. So yeah, that's up online, and I'll share the link.
Well, and I want to make sure that people like now know for a long time, there's been some talks on Datastar and it's kind of been mentioned in other people's talks, but a lot of times we would be referring people to the original talk I gave at Utah.js, right? And say, hey, this is kind of like, at least get that there's something here there. That talk is not amazing, but it's basically like, am I crazy or am I onto something? And I think Ben's talk, it's very much a, you're not crazy, and here's like it explained to everybody else. Because I was not the best at explain. I went a million miles an hour, and I kind of said, well, like either you get it or you don't. Like, trust me, bro, right? Whereas Ben actually steps through each step, and then he has a bunch of just one more thing moments where he's like stepping up the levels. And I will say now, it is by far my favorite talk on Datastar. Like by far, like we might as well throw the Utah.js thing in the archive bin of like garbage. And like whenever someone talks about like, hey, have you heard about Datastar? We need to point them to that talk. In fact, I think we should probably put it on the front page as like one of the things like that people see immediately, because it encapsulates so much of what like Datastar isn't special, but it's doing enough things that are different from what the baseline is that you just unlock these superpowers, even if you're in something like PHP, which is single threaded and it doesn't have all the access to the things that other languages do. So I love it. I think everybody should watch it again and give it a like. And I think it's really, really, really good. It's better than any talk I've given, for sure.
Thank you. The good thing is I got to go into some back-end concepts, right? Like I discussed in a very kind of short version, like I discussed event sourcing and CQRS and some of those things. Your Utah.js is probably a bit dated at this stage. I think the syntax has changed significantly.
Syntax is so wrong.
Like it's going to be way off. People are going to be looking at it thinking, this is not Datastar. What's he talking about?
Yeah. I mean, it's better now, but yes, it was different.
So there was one other thing about Rocket that we did want to cover, which was scope signals. And this was one of the things that kind of came up several months ago that we thought we were going to add to Datastar. We had a PR, I think, even, or some like a dev branch in the works, and we realized, no, this is the wrong approach, because scoped signals essentially means that you encapsulate like signals within something, but what is that thing? And the assumption always was, well, it's going to be like your DOM tree, I guess. It's going to be like one branch of your DOM tree, but the DOM is not really set up in that way, or it's not like intended to encapsulate state. So the conclusion that we eventually came to was, well, web components are for encapsulating state. Why don't we do that? And I think that was another reason that Rocket kind of came about. So the answer to signal scoping, which many people bring up, and we don't think is even that big of a deal because you have the ability to nest signals already. Signal scoping is now available in Rocket, and you can use it using the double $sign. So you define signals within your web component, they become specific to that web component only. Now, you still have the ability to interact with global signals, but component signals are there and they exist only within that component, and they're also cleaned up whenever that component is discarded. So
and I want to make sure
there's more to say.
Well, there's a little bit more to say in that the thing is that we were basically, when we were going back and forth about scope signals in Datastar, the main hitting point is, but what if you want to change it? It became a configuration nightmare because you're like, well, if I put it under this notation, then what if I want to get access to it later? If I want to change that, or like it became a nightmare. Whereas Rocket is our take, most of Pro is just our take on components that we think are valuable. And to be clear with everybody, Rocket is built as just a attribute component plugin. There's nothing special. We didn't get like special access into the internals or something like that. Like we were playing by the same rules as anybody else, which means anybody could make their own version of Rocket if they like have folly in their heart, because it was a nightmare. But I'm saying that the interesting thing is the road that we went down with that is we basically made it _Rocket, name of the web component, and then there's the individual elements that get hooked into with the web component is how the nested structure works, which means that all the stuff will get cleaned up over life cycles and stuff properly, but it also means you can use regular $sign to get access to the rest of the Datastar tree, signal tree, but also people at the outside of your component can actually hook into your thing by going to _rocket, name of the thing, and then the ID. Like, you still have the same tree, which means all of inspector still works, all the hooks still work. You could actually like update things. Like, I have a virtual scroll thing that actually hooks directly into calling the _rocket blah 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 from the backend. So the thing is, it really kind of opened it up to be like, look, we can't solve scope signals for everybody, but if you're gonna drink the Kool-Aid of Rocket, we have it solved for you. So it should show people that, like, yeah, you can, like, this is not a Datastar problem. This is a web component problem, and here's our approach to solving that.
So just so people understand as well, like, Rocket was a big undertaking. Like, you've said, like, Rocket is more complex than Datastar itself.
Oh,
so,
yeah, 100%. It is more complex. Like, the problem is that I'm trying to make all the features that I want in lit and all these other things. And so the core of Datastar, like the engine thing, is maybe 300 lines of code of actual, like, that's what really hooks things up properly. Especially if you don't consider signals, which is kind of on top of that. But the core of Rocket is like 1,800 lines, and there's more to it if you add the codecs and stuff. So it is bigger than Datastar by a lot. But also I'm doing a lot of things that you just don't get. Like, for example, like if Alpine, they have this idea of like their XIF, and you have to do it on a template thing. It's like, well, okay, but I don't want to do that. So if I put it on a div, then I will automatically wrap it and do the right things. I have like the template, so I can do these. Like, there's all these little helper features that I was really picky about that I wanted. So I'll be really curious to see what people think about it, because the syntax might be a little bit off, but it really is just making web components declarative. So, but it is like no joke. There's a lot going on in that code, and it's complicated, and the internals are gonna change. But the idea is to get the syntax right now.
yeah, so you mentioned things that we haven't even talked about. There are some Rocket specific attributes. So data if, you did mention, but then you get data else if and data else. So normally speaking with Datastar, you'll show or hide, right, using data show. But there's a situation in web components where you actually want something in the DOM or not in the DOM at all. So you get those attributes only within your Rocket components. They don't apply outside. And then data for, so that you can loop over signals. So kind of, I don't want to say SPA, but like front-end library kind of features.
I mean, it's a web component. That's where you put the stuff. Like, people like have wanted this stuff forever, but they're never going to get it in Datastar because it doesn't belong there. It belongs when you're doing your state in your web component. And the thing is, just like signals, when we tell people, yes, we have the fastest signal library set up in the world, please don't use signals. The same thing kind of goes for Rocket, is like, yes, we have declarative, like, data for, please don't use it and try to like build things like the normal backend way. But there are certain times where it can make sense. So it's one of those things. It's kind of a weirdism of, I had to build it to have all the right tools to build set of libraries I think we're going to make for everybody else. But at the same time, like, please don't just use this stuff because it exists. Please, I beg you to not.
You realize you're talking to developers here.
Well, what's funny is we actually had a Discord thing where someone was trying to understand data effect inside of Rocket. And I was like, well, data effect lives outside of, like, it has nothing to do with Rocket. It's actually a Datastar feature. And he's like, yeah, but I don't, like, there's not that much documentation on it. I'm like, then you don't need it. Like, if, like, don't use the thing just because it exists. And that's my only fear with, we had Anders on at the last podcast, and he's like boycotting Rocket. He's like, I already paid for all this, but I'm boycotting it because it's a bad idea. And I kind of share his sentiment, because the irony is that I'm going to be working on this thing called Star UI, and we'll be using Rocket. And I'm like, it's going to be great. But at the same time, I think people are jump to web components too early, and they jump to SPAs too early. So I'm in a, sorry, I have kids, 6-7 on this, that it's a necessary evil, but like, leave it to a few people to do. I beg you. If you're building a 3D engine, 100%, get in there and get rocketing. If you're building a charting library, great. But I already gave you like a version of eCharts that's literally the best library for doing this kind of stuff, the most powerful. So you're done. Like, please don't do too much with it, is all I'm asking.
I was joking with Anders in the Discord. I was like, the docs are just going to turn into, here's feature X. You probably shouldn't use it.
Yeah,
Right.
basically. Yeah.
So Rocket is when you need to do front end stuff where normally you'd reach for a JavaScript library. Now you can wrap that library or, create your own version of the functionality that you need to do. It's for front end state management and encapsulation.
Well, and the thing too is so that people are very clear, like there are times when if I'm writing a very complicated thing, like let's say I was writing a QR library or something, a QR code, something like that's like I have to do, like there's a thing in the mil spec standard, mil 2525, which is a way that you generate symbols for military applications. And it's an SVG thing. Like it's a very complicated thing to get right. And that's also, it changes really rapidly. So that is actually a good JavaScript library because it's a heavyweight thing that has to happen really quickly. So that's a situation where I want to be able to pull on the mil spec 2525 library and just drop it in. And I'm not trying to replace that entire thing just with a Rocket component. I just want to hook into it. Same thing if we have, I know we have quite a big Clojure community. Like if you're using ClojureScript and you have something that was written in that perspective and you're like, hey, I have this really interesting like macro thing. Great. We don't you're going to generate the JavaScript. We can point at that library and use it. So we're actually able to leverage more of the ecosystem because we're able to hook directly into these libraries that are written in ClojureScript or TypeScript or any other language that supports even WASM. We'll be able to hook into later directly, which I think is really powerful. So
you mentioned Clojure. So there was Clojure Conf just happened a couple of days, end of last week. That was it. And I saw somebody shared there was a slide on there that they were using Datastar. So I'm looking forward to those videos being published so we can see what.
And
what
just to give a heads up
there.
to people, because you never know how long those videos take to come out. They went from at 5 megabytes of JavaScript on like basically first load. They're basically building accounting software, so like a QuickBooks kind of thing. And they were at roughly 5 megabits and 20 seconds to get that initial load. And now they're down to 100 milliseconds and like less than 30 kilobytes total. And they're a Clojure shop, so they probably have some ClojureScript and some other stuff going on in there. So the irony is that they have literally orders of magnitude less stuff, and they've actually been deleting code like crazy. So their stuff's got faster, it's smaller, and I keep having that. I have a I'm happy to put money towards charity on it. That any code that you write in anything, our version will be smaller and faster. And that's just
it'll be very interesting to see how they evaluate the improvements there. Like I'm sure it got simpler to maintain and faster and smaller and all of those things, but like how do they evaluate the actual benefits of those changes? On the topic of conferences, how do you like that segue?
Super easy, barely an inconvenience. That was great.
We've teased DataConf, which is a conference that we want to organize next year. The gears are in motion. Stuff is happening. I don't want to make promises, but I do want to let people know that it will almost certainly take place in early July in Europe, in Central Europe. I don't want to say just where until we've actually locked down the venue and the dates and that kind of stuff. But it is happening. So if you're available and interested in early July next year, just block out your entire calendar. No, I'm kidding. But it's going to be good. We're going to talk about Datastar, but as we've mentioned here, it's not a Datastar conference purely. It's about data-oriented design and the full stack web development, kind of in the Datastar way where it's hypermedia driven. And we're going to have some great talks and possibly a workshop, but all of that is still to be determined and locked down.
Well, and I think it's really important. People have heard me talk about this in the past, but there really needs to be something like the Handmade Hero Network, which is basically all about building things properly from the ground up. But there needs to be a version of that for the web, because the irony is there's so many web developers, and that's actually the majority of web developers, and yet people don't really take their craft very seriously. Like, for example, when someone says they're a React dev, almost never do they mean, oh, I understand how the VDOM works under the hood. I understand the compiler and what's going on there. Like, they're not they're users of it. They don't understand the underlying tech. And I'm not saying that you have to know everything about it, but you should understand how the thing that you're building your livelihood on actually works. So yeah, we're going to be definitely pushing for things that, like, we want people to understand. If you're a Datastar developer, you should have be able to understand how the internals work, and having talks about that, and having talks about, like, how to build up things from ground zero, and caring about the cache and all these other things that it doesn't seem like the web really takes seriously. But I mean, I know that you've been on a huge journey, especially lately, of starting to care about your craft in a way that you haven't felt like you've been. It's been interesting to see you have our talks back and forth, like, the last 10 years. You're kind of like, it's okay. But now you seem to be on a whole new road. It might be interesting for you to
Yeah.
talk about that, of like where your head's at this last little bit. It's been kind of interesting.
I do want to save it for the next podcast because I have an application that I'm working on now and it should be ready by then. But very much so, like I'm getting back into actual programming, right? Like web
And
development
engineering, right?
and
Like,
engineering, yes, because web development has become like take tool A and tool B and make them work together, and then like take tool C and then like just attach that somehow, and like just it's just become an integration of tooling rather than like, okay, let's think about this problem from first principles and let's build a solution from the ground up using solid programming principles. So I'm getting back into that with Go because PHP. See, PHP, I kind of have this weird relationship with because it's so great because there's so much tooling and there's so much focus on developer experience, but it's tooling and developer experience that make you kind of a lazy developer and take you away from programming and towards this kind of like just, I'm just connecting things up, right? So I'm getting back, I'm finding my joy back in like actual programming. And
yeah, it's been kind of exciting to see, because you're like, you'll say, well, hey, how am I? It was a really funny talk we had maybe a week ago, where you're like, you know, what's the right way to do a structure Go folders? And I'm like, you are thinking about the wrong problem right now. Like,
yeah,
dude, just solve your problem and the folder structure will make itself. Like,
yeah,
do not worry about that right now. Worry about the code that goes in the folders. Like, don't make any folders right now. Like, that's not the problem you're solving. And it's funny because a stupid talk about folders ended up exposing a lot of, like, it was almost like a therapy session of like, like you're trying to deconvert from OOP and try to like open your mind to like what the computer actually does. It was kind of a funny like therapy session to be like, why are you talking about folders? Like, there's trauma from your like some past relationship with OOP is what it came down to, which is really funny. It was a therapy session and it was great.
yeah. It is years and years of working with frameworks, right? And each framework has a folder structure, and that folder structure very often defines, how your application is, your application structure, um, and to just kind of, and that's what I've been doing with Go. Like I'm not using a framework.
Well, it's one of those things of like, you realize, and I did quite a bit of stuff in .NET, like when I was at EA and stuff. A lot of the tooling was in .NET, and you look at all the levels of what you have. Like, if you work with an ASP server, ASP.NET, like there's all these layers between like you and the actual like request and reply. Like, there's all this stuff that gets generated for you to make it easy for you. And in Go, it's just like, here's the request byte buffer. You get to write to a buffer, and here's the request with the context and like the headers. That's it. Like, that's all you get, because that's all you like. Why do you need anything else? Figure it out. Like, that's it. That's all you need. So it's interesting that you start to realize all these features, um, they actually slow you down, and you start to realize why things are slow. Not because they can't be fast. It's not that PHP couldn't be faster. It's that to put all those conveniences to handle every situation means that it has to add so much more stuff to be able to handle every situation, instead of just going, well, if I need that situation, I'll build the thing that I need for that. Like,
Right.
it's a different style of working. And you realize that just not doing those steps, you can be crazy fast. And it's not the language that magically makes it faster. It's just the mentality. That's one of the things I will say about Go is like, if you do the right mentality, like, it can be really fast. And it's not because it's that fast. It's just that it's like Java's faster than Go, but yet Go apps tend to be faster in general
Yeah.
in
It
real
just
world.
it feels like the bumpers are off, and that's kind of in one way, in one sense, a scary thing. It's like you're bowling, right? And you have the bumpers down the side, and you know that the bumpers are going to keep you like not necessarily in the middle, but not in the gutter, right? But you take the bumpers away, and yeah, you can fall in the gutter, but you can also like spin, and you can like use the full breadth of
Yeah.
the lane. So
And you will be a
uh,
better person when you have the right tools to do that. Like if you know that like you have no guardrail,
yeah,
it makes a difference. Circus analogy, there are times when you don't have a net, and that's actually the safest thing because you're not relying on the slip, like you're making it count. And
right,
there's something about that, right? But again, Go's kind of a weird beast because you still have a garbage collector, you still have the ability to have closures and all that. So it's not like going to C or Odin or something like that. So um, I feel like it's a really like work truck language, and it's been interesting to see you explore it. And it's you can tell when someone's really enjoying coding, and you've kind of hit that in a way that people only get from like exploring a Lisp. I don't know. Like I can see the exhilaration of you actually feeling like I can do this in a
yeah,
way that you didn't, almost like you had to have tools to do this stuff.
yeah. Well, we talked about it not last time, but the previous time with the new merch shop that has
Mm-hmm.
since gone live. So that's why we're showing our t-shirts. And you can, in case we didn't mention this already, I don't remember. You can go get your t-shirts and your hats. The caps are currently not available because uh, maybe in some ways I'm a perfectionist, but the embroidery isn't perfect. So I've taken it off while I figure that out.
I think it's
But
fine. He is perfectionist.
you can get t-shirts, you can get stickers currently, and soon you can get caps as well. But that whole project was, and I discussed this previously, so I won't go back into it. But that was like writing an e-commerce store from the ground up using Go, and the idea there was, um, in terms of the products, like let's not sell 100 products. Let's just make it easy, no choice paralysis. Like you get a couple of colors and two choices of t-shirt, and that's pretty much it. But in terms of like writing it, it was interesting to say, okay, let me. And I even intentionally didn't look at other e-commerce shops and stuff like that. Obviously, I've done enough online shopping to have seen plenty, but I wanted to take the approach, well, what is the Datastar way? And for me, the Datastar way was like, you don't go anywhere. You don't like need to leave the page or the context, or you don't need to go to a product page or to your shopping cart to go to the next step. We just show you the next thing that you can do at any point in time. So I feel like it was like, in the end, it's a very simple, easy, streamlined shopping experience, and there was still a lot went into it, right? Because we're still shipping globally. There's still like dealing with global taxes, dealing with stock, all of those things. So that's all there. We can go maybe into it another time.
Yeah, I want
But
to know when the robes are available. Like, I want my cult robes. When are those going to be
well,
available?
well, I think I'll have to put you in charge of that because I don't know how to design a cult robe.
We'll
I
just
have
we'll
no
just steal
desire to either.
we'll just steal robes from like the hotels here in Vegas. Like, I'll just take some robes, and those will be our official robes. I there's a really silly thing I've seen on Amazon that's like this ugliest version of like just uh nebulas and space crap, but it looks like terrible, gaudy $30 tracksuits, and I'm like, oh man, that needs to be the official one at DataConf. Like
I don't want to show up to
every presenter gets
DataConf
every.
and see 100 people in robes and spacey
I'm
tracksuits.
saying the spacey tracksuit. I think everybody that presents needs to wear the spacey tracksuit to present.
Yeah.
Like that seems right on brand, right? We should put up a poll later that everyone that presents has to be in a space themed tracksuit. Like,
The one thing I'd say about our polls is whatever like comes out on top is never the thing we choose.
it's very true. Yeah, you need to game it so that you're the second place or third place thing, or we won't take it seriously. So no, it's very true.
So just back to Rocket. So one of the things that Rocket was like a stepping stone to is Stellar CSS, which we've talked about here again. So do you want to give us an update on Stellar, how that's going?
Yeah, no, I the thing is that all these things, because Datastar in our mind is done. Like anything that we have, like we might talk about RC7 for a second, but like everything is done. It's just little minor things. It's not to the engine; it's actually to plugins and stuff mostly. There's a couple of things that came up from Rocket with that, but the gist is that I have all of the features in Stellar that I want for when we ship it. All the features of like every variable, everything, like the baseline of like, hey, these are good. Like this is what I wish OpenProps was. This is what I wish Tailwind was. All that's there. Now I'm in the process of SaaSifying it, making it something that can run long term, and it makes it easy on us and stuff. So the like you're not getting it this week, but like I am actively, now that Rocket is in place where people can start playing with it, I can go back to finishing up Stellar because yeah, feature complete, but not ready to be like the difference between like a tool and an actual product, right? So I'm productifying it right now. And the other part of that is I want to get Rocket out the door because I want to, it may not ship at the same time, but it'll ship very shortly after the idea of Stellar UI, which is a set of Rocket components that are built with Stellar in mind, so that like it actually pulls in the right the right CSS standards and all that. So the neat thing is that if you have Stellar and you have Stellar UI components, when you make changes to your Stellar interface, your entire website automatically changes with all the Rocket components you've done and all that. Like it's all integrated. So it was one of those things. If I wanted to make sure that when I go to start working on the Stellar UI, enough of Rocket's in place that I could actually just start rocking through all the components that I wanted to. So it's basically a situation where we had a chicken and an egg, and so Rocket's in place, and people can start looking at it. But now I can get back on Stellar, which is feature complete, but still needs a little bit more work. But I'm really excited about it because the end goal for all this is basically there's Datastar, there's Rocket to the side, there's Stellar to the side, but the real combination is the Stellar UI stuff, because then we can have things like QR code library things, date pickers, calendars, all these things that people don't tend to do because, like, for example, Daisy UI, great looking library. The problem is it has no JavaScript. So there's certain things that you just cannot do, or you had the ShadCN style where you have to copy paste it into your code. And now like you are now burdened with controlling that because they want to make it so that you can modify it. Well, if you build Stellar, if you had Stellar, you wouldn't have to do the ShadCN thing because you can edit that live, let alone be able to start modifying it. So I feel like we're really getting close to the whole thing of like that diamond pattern of Datastar at the bottom, and then you have Stellar and Rocket, and then they form Stellar UI. We're almost there. Like I feel like if everything goes well, all of this will be done before DataConf. Like we will have a full set of all these things done, and I can basically have DataConf to say goodbye to you all and walk off into the desert. So that's the hope, is that all of this is done by that time. And then like someone can usurp, and the Thunderdome fight can happen so that I can be, my place in the try can be taken Dune style.
Just so everybody understands, my definition of done and Delaney's definition of done are not the same thing. and specifically with Stellar, I mean, we're talking about a SaaS, right? Everything like Rocket and Datastar, these are products that you download and you use, whereas Stellar has a back-end aspect to it. So we are going to host this, and we're going to have a software as a service thing. There's like a bunch more considerations that need to go into
for sure.
Stellar.
100%. But cool. My version of done is like it's up and running enough where Ben can maintain it, and then I can like someone can fight me for my with a Chris knife so that they can take my place. I can't wait for that day to happen. So,
should we talk briefly about RC7, because that's I don't think we even talked about RC6 in much detail, at least. But
no, the only thing that's there's the one thing that I will say that Rocket brought up, because I know you might have a list of things, but the one thing that Rocket brought to the bear is that, for example, I have a virtual scroll example, and it's not like most virtual scrolls. The most virtual scrolls, they don't take the idea. Like I think ours is kind of neat in Rocket in that there's certain things that the browser knows about. So it knows the actual size that something got rendered on page, right? So it can send that data up to the backend, and the backend knows how many elements there are in total and how many are fit. So ours does variable height, which most virtual scrolls don't do. And there's a bunch of things that are going on there. But one of the things that it made me realize is that because it's its own encapsulated state, I wanted to be able to do post and get actions and stuff like that are completely independent of what's going on in the signal chain. So there's basically a payload now built into the things, which lets you completely override what gets into the server. So you can send whatever you want, but it's not going to we're not going to merge it for you. We're not going to do that stuff. It's just like, I want to send this payload, ship it. So, and that basically overwrites all the signal stuff. So that's the big change for RC7. And it's an addition, but it's literally the only thing that we changed in any of the plugins to make Rocket work, which I'm really proud of, is that we didn't do some weird thing to the engine or do any kind of we just used Datastar correctly, and we were able to make an entirely new framework out of it, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah, Rocket is very self-contained, right? In that,
it's one plugin.
Yeah, it's one plugin. And when you have data if, data for, those are not Datastar plugins. Those are just Rocket concepts. The Rocket is actually parsing your HTML, looking for those, and then doing whatever it needs to do with them.
Correct.
Yeah, the other change addition, this is an addition too, that's coming in RC7. People have been asking for a way to always reconnect. So up until now, your SSE, your fetch and your SSE connection, if that drops due to network errors, we have an auto retry. And that's been there since the beginning, as far as I know. But people have said, well, if there's an error, or if the server crashes or something happens that is not considered a network error, it would be nice to have a retry there. And we kind of had quite a long discussion about how exactly that should work, because you might want it configurable. So essentially that's what we did. We made it configurable. So we're adding some more retry options to fetch. So I think it's going to be called retry, and the default is auto, which is what it's always been. And now you can also retry on error, always, and never. So that should satisfy, all the
everybody.
Yeah, well, yeah. You can never satisfy everybody, but it satisfies all of the use cases that have come up so far and that people have requested.
Yeah, and this is one of those interesting things of, you kind of when Datastar is bigger, when a project is bigger than you. So my whole thing has always been that if you're sending an error, you're sending an error, and you shouldn't reconnect. You should send 200s, and I have a whole essay about this called "I'm a Teapot." And the thing is that some people say, "Well, I have a proxy in between that I don't control." A, I don't believe you, but B, that's a political issue, not an actual technical one, and I hate technical solutions to political problems. But it's still one of those things. If it was not a huge lift in the size of the binary and stuff. So yeah, we approved it, but it's in most situations, please guys, use the actual codes and the actual parts of the browser. Use the auto version, because it's the correct answer. Don't just turn things on just because you don't want to talk to the guy that runs the firewall.
Right. And that's where we have to be careful, right? We could add configuration options to everything in Datastar. And we say no a lot, and we say yes sometimes. And when people come with requests, if there's anybody listening who does have a request, we are open to ideas and suggestions. But you need to justify your argument. You need to make a strong argument.
With concrete, real-world examples that you're actually dealing with.
Yes. I'm allergic to it would be nice if. That's okay. It would be nice, but why? Right? So if there's... And in this situation, there are enough people giving actual good reasons and concrete examples of how this would significantly improve their applications, that we decided to put it in. And at the same time, we're saying most people should just leave it as is. The defaults, we don't just pick sane defaults, we pick opinionated defaults that we think are the way you should do it. And this brings me to another topic that I have written down, which is, people very often ask, what is the Datastar way? To the point where I'm almost considering adding a page to the docs.
I think it's a really good idea, because there's a lot of the things are, if you use Datastar correct, in the way that we keep saying, well, in the Discord, you are going to have a super fast site that is dead simple to write. But I do think that there's some of that's if you just play with Datastar for long enough, you will guaranteed ending up doing it the Datastar way. If you're like, oh, I just want to optimize and I want to think about this, but most people just want to come in and be told what to do. So I actually think they're right. This is one of those situations where I think being forced to be like, look, this is how you do it correctly. Um,
It would be
I think it
nice
would
to
help.
have it would be nice to have somewhere to point people to, because a lot of the Discord discussion is people coming in and asking, how do I do this, or what approach should I take? And the Datastar way is just our opinions on how to keep things simple, how to keep state in the right place. But documenting that would just mean that we're answering the same question less frequently.
Well, and this is where I got to I've thought about writing a book just because that's not ideal, but it's more of a like, we need to step someone through an entire project of this is how it would be done in React or whatever. Here's what someone that's coming from that world might write. And then here's the way that we think you should write that. Um, that'd be, but that's also a big undertaking as opposed to just saying like, do fat morphs, don't do signals, like don't overcomplicate it. That would be maybe a good page is a good start to a book. Like,
I'm thinking like the page is just an opinionated like question answer. Like, should I use fat morph or should I use like fine grained morph, or like, should I use signals everywhere or use as little as possible? And like, and the answer is like, without giving like a long explanation, just say like, use as few signals as possible, and maybe a one liner about why.
Well, it is funny that someone on the on the Discord, it was yesterday, I think, was like, "Why do you guys talk about signals first if it's something you shouldn't use?" And it's like it was actually used. It's talked about second, and even if it was talked about like first, it's still we tell you don't use them, and yet people still put 500 signals on a page. Like it is kind of weird.
I mean, Datastar is just a tool. Like the result of your work is not like a judgment of the tool, it's of your skill, right? So if people come into Discord, we tell them how we think they should do it. That is not the only way, but it is perhaps the data. I don't know if the Datastar way, I think it's the clearest way of putting it, but it's just like our opinionated way of.
Yeah. And the thing is, we can back up those claims with metrics and flame graphs and all that and show people. But every time that we try to do a head to head with people, they kind of shut up, like they go away. And I think it's because like we know we have the things on our side. And I'll speak to this. Like there was a situation that came up where Ben and I were involved where they basically wanted to use Datastar for a project and want us to be involved. And the irony is we said no. And they're like, well, why are you saying no to us? It's like, well, if we can't actually fix your backend and can't actually worry about the entire thing, like Datastar is not your problem. Just adding Datastar to your page doesn't magically solve it. There's underlying low level things that we have to solve first. And if we don't do that, Datastar will look bad because you're not actually solving your problem. And Datastar, just adding Datastar to a page doesn't, you just slap this baby can handle so many FPS. Like, it can handle so many FPS because if you're doing the right things in the backend, you get those things. It can show off a backend, but the problem is it can also show all the problems with your backend. So if you have a slow set of queries that take 20 seconds, well, then Datastar is going to look like it takes 20 seconds.
Right.
And you're not going to get any of the benefit out of it. So the irony is that most of the time when you're talking about a Datastar project, it just gets out of the way and it's actually your backend that's the star of the show. So I just want to make sure people
is kind of just a pass through at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It really is.
And this is why DataConf is not that focused on the front end, whereas it's more focused on the back end and the full stack, really.
Yeah. Well, no, the thing is, there might be some cool things. Like I might give, like we don't have any talks lined up exactly, but I mean, I'll probably give a little talk. But I actually think that, like, hey, you want to make a 3D engine? Here's how you hook it up into like how do you hook up 3JS and how do you make components and how would you do that? That might be an interesting talk, which is technically around like how do I make things declarative so that other people can use it. But that's about as much front endy stuff that you need because it's already solved with Datastar. Like there's not that many talks that are interesting with Datastar because like I know that at the Big Sky Conference they had the meme thing of like, oh, you made a 3D scene with HTMX or you did the Flappy Bird with HTMX. Those aren't memes are very interesting in Datastar because we know you can already do them. It's kind of boring. It's like, oh, you made a thing. Okay, cool. Like if someone made a netcode thing that like did real time with like WebRTC or not even WebRTC, but like the web transport, that'd be cool, because that's like saying, hey, I use Datastar for all this other stuff, but like I'm using web transport for this net code stuff. Like that would be a great talk. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the outline of talks are about. But I guarantee there's going to be Clojure ones and Python ones, and like, and the thing is that we had a little talk a little while ago where people showed up and we just talked about our backends and stuff in a CQRS way. And I feel like there will be a lot more of that going on, of like, hey, we can talk the same language and be able to do some really interesting stuff. So I'm excited to see the people talk to each other, because I think the web is really broken up. Like you're either a React developer or a Svelte developer, like all these things. And once you're just like, man, we all just use web components and we're all one big group, that you get so much more out of it long term because you have so much more to learn from other people. So
Yeah.
even though
And
I'm a
that's,
low level guy, I love Lisp because I feel like I've learned so much by thinking about the way they think about things is really changes the way you think about things. I think that helps a lot. So
right. And that's a big motivation for DataConf. One
100%.
is like meeting in person, seeing face to face, right? Because we tend to just see people's usernames or
Yeah,
avatars, or
tracksuit to tracksuit. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and of course then like, and you're in the room with people for 2 to 3 days, so you have these conversations and you can like, you know, talk to like-minded people about very low level or technical things, or not, like whatever comes up, but it's an opportunity to connect on that level, which is
Well, and also
super
you were
exciting.
talking about like we're looking at doing 2 to 3 days. So it's not even just a 1-day conference. A lot of conferences, like people think that's really ambitious for your first conference, but it's like, but there's a lot to talk about because we're doing so many different. It's not even like a Utah JS. It's all JavaScript people. Like it's like, okay, but
Right.
we have we have those people, and we have every Python developer, every Clojure developer, every Rust developer, every Ruby developer. Like we have a lot of room for interesting talks.
Yeah.
So if you are a Datastar user, or even if you're not, but you're into data oriented stuff, um, I highly recommend like thinking about what a talk will be. We'll put a call out here, probably at the beginning of the year kind of thing. But yeah, I'm super excited about the prospect of having something like Handmade Hero for the web. Like that sounds amazing. And I don't know why it hasn't existed yet.
Well, we've got to be pioneers and start it.
Well, we're trying to take on every front end framework
Right.
and and tailwind and uh, lit and all these other things. Might as well take on the conference circuit as well. What could go wrong?
What could go wrong? Yeah, famous last words. All right. I think we're going to wrap up there. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.
See ya.